stop them from helping her own daughter? What is she hiding?
I couldn't breathe. The world felt like it was closing in on me. Every breath was a struggle, and the last thing I heard before everything went dark was my mom saying, "Leave her. She's fine." The air felt thick, as though it were fighting against me. My lungs were screaming for oxygen, but my body refused to cooperate. I could barely see through the blur of panic, the outline of faces growing distorted. My heartbeat thudded in my chest, erratic and loud, like it might burst out at any moment. I heard voices, muffled but urgent, but none of it made sense. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I looked up, my vision doubling, and saw the paramedic's face. Jeremy, a man with kind eyes and a tense jaw, was crouching over me. He looked at me with concern, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the oxygen mask. His eyes met mine, and I could feel the gravity of the moment settling between us. "She needs oxygen," he said, his voice firm, but just enough hesitation lingering in his tone to tell me this wasn't normal. Jeremy's gaze shifted to Martha, my mom. She stood there, arms crossed, a coldness in her eyes I couldn't understand. Martha, in her 40s, tall and always composed, had always been the strong one, the one who kept everything together. But right now, she wasn't showing any of the urgency I thought I'd see. Instead, her response hit me like a slap. "Leave her. She's fine," she said, her voice far too calm for a situation like this. I was gasping, trying to fill my lungs with air that wouldn't come, and yet she stood there, immovable, like she had everything under control. Her eyes didn't even flicker with worry. I couldn't understand it. Why wasn't she helping me? I couldn't make sense of anything anymore. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg her to help me, to save me, but my body betrayed me, and all I could manage was a weak, wheezing breath. But that wasn't the end of it. That wasn't the end of the fight. I saw the fire captain approach, the man with authority who carried the weight of the situation in his posture alone. Greg, in his 40s, with a tough, no-nonsense demeanor, had entered the room like a storm, like he knew exactly what to do when things went south. His heavy boots thudded on the floor as he stepped in front of me, blocking the view of my mom. His presence made everything feel heavier. He paused for a long moment, his eyes flickering between Martha and me. He saw what was happening, the disarray, the tension in the room. Then, as if he had already made a decision, he fixed his eyes on Martha. "Who told you to stop treatment?" he asked, his voice low, but the command in it was undeniable. My mom didn't flinch. She just stood there, unyielding. I could feel the air in the room thickening with the weight of his words. The paramedics exchanged uncertain glances. They didn't want to escalate things. But I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was a battle of wills. A battle I wasn't sure I was going to survive. Then, everything went quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't breathe, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get the chance to again. I've set up the intense moment of Lily's struggle and her mom's refusal, as well as introduced the tension with the arrival of the fire captain. This section sets the emotional and physical stakes high, leaving the audience eager to find out what happens next. The room was thick with tension, almost suffocating. I could feel the sweat starting to bead on my forehead, and my chest heaved with every struggle for air. My mind was spinning, but all I could focus on was the sharp, shallow breaths that seemed to escape my body quicker than I could inhale. Jeremy, the paramedic, took another step toward me. I could see the doubt clouding his expression. It was as if he were weighing the risks of disobeying my mom, but at the same time, he could see the seriousness of the situation. He was in a bind, but his hands were already hovering over the oxygen tank, ready to act. But Martha, my mom, just stood there. There was something unyielding about her posture, her arms crossed tight across her chest, her eyes narrowing as she faced off against the fire captain. There was no rush, no frantic energy. She seemed calm, eerily so. "Leave her alone," she said again, this time her voice a little colder, as if she were shutting down the conversation altogether. "She's fine." Fine? I could barely breathe, and she was telling them I was fine? Greg, the fire captain, didn't take his eyes off her. The tension between them was palpable. He seemed like he'd been in countless life and death situations, but this was different. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was personal. His brows furrowed, and he stepped closer to Martha. For a split second, I could feel my body shudder in a way that had nothing to do with the oxygen deprivation. What was going on? Why was my mom refusing to let them help me? "Ma'am, I need you to move aside. Your daughter is not fine. She's in distress, and I'm not going to stand here and watch her die because you're too stubborn to accept help. It wasn't just the words that hit me, but the tone, the finality of it. Greg wasn't asking anymore. He was ordering. And suddenly, there was an unfamiliar shift in the room. The paramedics stood straighter, no longer uncertain. They were ready to act, but Martha didn't move. She didn't even flinch. Her gaze shifted back to me. Her eyes were locked on mine, cold, almost indifferent. I could feel her distance, but there was something else beneath it, something darker that I couldn't place. I wanted to shout, to cry out for help, to beg her to just listen, but my voice wouldn't come. And then, just as quickly as he had approached, Greg stepped back. He turned to Jeremy, giving him the nod. It wasn't a command, it was an understanding. Without a word, the paramedic rushed to set up the oxygen mask. But then something shifted. My mom's voice sliced through the air again, more forcefully this time. "Don't you dare." Her words were like a whip. "I'm telling you, she's fine. She doesn't need it." I felt the oxygen mask nearing my face, and for a moment, a flicker of panic hit me. Could this be happening? Was my mom really going to stop them from saving me? Was I going to die here today, with her standing over me, refusing to let them help? My breath caught again. I felt like I was slipping into darkness, like there was no way back, no air left to fill my lungs. And then, just as the room seemed to spiral away, Greg spoke again, his voice a bit more forceful now. "I'll ask you one more time, ma'am. Move aside. This is not your decision anymore." His words hung in the air like a thick, unspoken challenge. The fire captain wasn't backing down. His eyes were locked on my mom, unwavering, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of fear in my mother's eyes. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She hesitated, and it felt like the room was holding its breath. Then, just as Jeremy started to place the mask on my face, Martha stepped back, finally retreating. Her eyes never left me, though. Her expression was unreadable, her face taut with something that could have been anger, fear, or regret. The mask slipped over my nose, and a rush of oxygen poured into my lungs. I inhaled deeply, gratefully, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. But there was no relief. No peace. I wasn't sure what just happened, what my mom had been thinking, or why she'd acted the way she had. There were too many questions bubbling up in my head, too many pieces of a puzzle I couldn't understand. Why had she refused treatment? And most importantly, what had she been afraid of? The room, still heavy with tension, seemed to stretch into eternity. As the oxygen flowed into my lungs, I felt a bit of relief, but only for a second. My breath was easier now, but the questions, the fear, the anger, all of it still clawed at me. I was barely holding on to consciousness, but I knew one thing for sure. Something was wrong. My vision cleared just enough to see Martha standing near the corner of the room, her face tight with tension. She hadn't moved. Not really. Not since the moment she told them to leave me alone. There was something about the way she stood there. Her arms still crossed, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't put my finger on. Was it anger? Fear? Or just the same old control she always had over everything? I could still feel the burn in my chest, the remnants of the panic attack, but it was slowly subsiding thanks to the oxygen mask. Still, a lingering coldness spread through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't being told everything I needed to know. "Why didn't you let them help me, Mom?" My voice came out in a hoarse whisper, barely more than a breath. The question had been on the tip of my tongue the entire time, but I couldn't find the strength to ask until now. Her eyes darted to mine for just a split second. She didn't answer immediately, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then her gaze flicked to Greg, who stood just a few steps behind her, his arms folded as if he were prepared for anything. He wasn't making any attempt to talk to her now, he just watched her, silent and unwavering. "She's fine, Lily." Her voice was a low murmur, like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She didn't apologize, or even seem to recognize how serious it had been. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "You said that already." My words came out sharper this time, despite the exhaustion in my body. I was still reeling from what had happened, barely able to understand it, much less accept it. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, humming with tension. "Why didn't you let them help me, Mom?" This time, I said it slowly, deliberately. She had to answer me. She had to. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might snap at me, but she didn't. Instead, she took a breath, long and deep, like she was trying to find the words. "I'm protecting you." Her words were slow, deliberate, but the tone was distant, too distant, like she was speaking to someone else, someone who didn't know her like I did. Protecting me? I didn't get it. I didn't get any of it. I was confused, exhausted, and angry. And all I wanted to know was why. Why wouldn't she let them save me when I needed it most? It didn't make sense. My mom had always been there for me, always known exactly what to do in every situation. But this was something else entirely, something I couldn't understand. And I wasn't sure I even wanted to anymore. As I lay there, still hooked up to the oxygen, I glanced at the paramedics, Jeremy and Sarah, who were standing a bit further back. I caught their eyes, but neither of them seemed ready to speak. Jeremy looked like he was holding something back, his brow furrowed in thought, but he said nothing. I looked back at Greg. The fire captain, the one who had stepped in when I was slipping away, still hadn't spoken. He had positioned himself a few feet away from Martha, and it was clear he wasn't going to let her keep holding the reins. But the silence between them felt deafening, like there was something else happening, something we weren't talking about yet. Finally, Greg broke the silence. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying," his voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "This isn't about your decision anymore. Your daughter was in real danger. You know that, right?" He didn't wait for a response. "I'm just here to do my job, and right now, my job is to make sure she's safe. So I need you to step aside." I could see the shift in my mom's demeanor. Her shoulders stiffened, her fists clenching, but she didn't back down. Not this time. "She's fine," my mom repeated, quieter this time, almost like a mantra. But it didn't sound convincing anymore. There was something else beneath it. Fear, maybe? Guilt? Why couldn't she just tell me the truth? The silence stretched again. It was broken only by the rhythmic sound of the oxygen machine working beside me, the steady hum that felt almost like an anchor to the reality I was so desperately trying to cling to. Finally, my mom let out a sharp breath and turned toward Greg. "I'm not asking you again," she said, the command in her voice colder than I'd ever heard. It was like a threat. Greg didn't react. He simply nodded to Jeremy again, who immediately stepped forward. The tension was unbearable, and for a second I thought my mom was going to stop them again, but then she didn't. Her shoulders sagged, just slightly, as though she was suddenly defeated by the whole situation. "You should have listened to me," she muttered, almost to herself. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What was going on? What wasn't she telling me? I wanted to scream at her to explain, to tell me what the hell she was talking about, why she thought I was fine when I was barely holding on to life, but the words wouldn't come. The oxygen mask felt like a lifeline, and I wasn't sure if I could hold on without it. I could feel the air coming back into my lungs, but it wasn't enough to ease the turmoil that had suddenly swelled in my chest. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "Why won't you tell me?" Greg turned to the paramedics, signaling that it was time to go. His face was grim, but there was nothing left to say. They were leaving. And still, I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know why my mom had done what she did, why she had tried to stop them, why she was so afraid to let them help me. And more than anything, I didn't know what this meant for us, what it meant for our relationship. As they walked out, I felt the first stirrings of panic creeping back in. The room was silent once more. I was left with Martha, my mom, who couldn't or wouldn't answer any of my questions. The oxygen mask felt like a temporary lifeline, but even as I inhaled deeply, the panic gnawed at me. The room was eerily quiet, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. My mom stood just a few feet away, not saying a word. Why was she acting like this? Every breath I took, every pulse of air entering my lungs, was a reminder that I almost didn't make it, but there was something else in the air now, something darker. It wasn't just the oxygen I needed to survive. I needed answers. "Why didn't you let them help me, Mom?" I asked it again, my voice now stronger, even though it still cracked. But Martha didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at me, her face unreadable. The weight of the unspoken words between us felt unbearable. She had tried to protect me, but from what? Why couldn't she just tell me the truth? I was tired of the silence, tired of the distance between us, tired of feeling like I was the last to know everything. She exhaled sharply, her arms still crossed. Her posture was stiff, frozen, almost as if she were trying to shield herself from something she didn't want to confront. Finally, she spoke, but her words were fragmented. "You don't understand, Lily. I'm trying to protect you." There it was again, protection. The same excuse she had given when we'd had those heated arguments in the past. The same thing she had said when she'd overprotected me for years, when she'd tried to control every part of my life. But this wasn't just a matter of control. This was different. I could feel it in my bones. Something wasn't right. Protect me from what? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see her flinch. Just a brief twitch of her face, but it was enough to show me that there was more to this than she was letting on. She wasn't just trying to protect me from medical treatments or what could go wrong. There was something deeper, something that I had no clue about. Mom, please, I pleaded, my voice almost cracking. You're scaring me. Just tell me what's going on. She stood there, her gaze shifting away from me. It was like she couldn't meet my eyes. Her lips pressed together tightly, and I could see her jaw working, as though she were trying to find the right words. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't understand. How had I gone from being a normal teenager with normal worries to this? How had everything spiraled so quickly into confusion, fear, and anger? For years, Martha had been my rock, always in control, always one step ahead. But right now, I wasn't sure if I knew her at all. And that's when I realized something I hadn't considered before. Maybe this wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about her. I glanced at the oxygen mask, the steady sound of the machine, the only thing filling the void. It was working slowly, but surely. The dizziness was finally lifting, and the tightness in my chest was slowly fading. I was going to be okay, at least for now, but my mind raced in 1,000 different directions. What had happened in the past? I had always known that my mom had been protective, especially after a few health scares when I was younger, but nothing had ever felt like this. Nothing had ever felt like she was keeping something from me. Suddenly, memories flashed through my mind. Snippets of old conversations, moments when she had become unreasonably worried, when she had kept me from doing normal things, like going to sleepovers or playing sports. It had always been about keeping me safe, but I had never felt it was this extreme. Was it just a phase? Or had something happened that I didn't know about? The silence grew heavy between us again. The longer she stood there, the more the distance between us seemed to stretch. I could see it in her eyes now, something she had been hiding. Just as I was about to speak again, the door to the room creaked open, and I turned to see Jeremy and Sarah walking in. Their presence felt like a breath of fresh air, though I wasn't sure if they could do anything to ease the tension. Jeremy, the paramedic who had been so insistent on getting me oxygen, stepped forward first. "How are you feeling, Lily?" His voice was gentle, but I could hear the underlying concern. He knew something wasn't right too. "Better. I started, but the words trailed off. "I need to know what happened." He looked at me with a mix of sympathy and caution. "Your mom," he paused, his gaze flicking briefly to Martha. "She was very concerned about you. She was worried that you might have an allergic reaction." That didn't make sense. I had never had a history of allergies, and I had been fine for years. I knew Martha was overprotective, but she wasn't the type to act irrationally. Something else was going on. Before I could respond, Sarah spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Lily, we need to talk about your medical history." I stiffened. Medical history? I'd never had a serious medical issue, not like this. What were they talking about? Martha's expression darkened, and she quickly stepped between me and the paramedics. "You don't need to talk about this," she said quickly, her voice rising just a little. "Mom," I whispered. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "What are you hiding from me?" There was a brief, agonizing pause. Martha looked at me, her face conflicted, almost tortured. I could see the strain in her features, the subtle way her fingers twitched at her sides. She was trying so hard to keep it all together, but the cracks were starting to show. And I knew then that there was something buried deep inside her, something she didn't want to share with me. But it wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about keeping me safe. It was about her and the fear she was trying to keep locked away. I took a deep breath, the oxygen still coursing through me. It was working, but it wasn't enough to stop the storm inside my head. The questions were building, one after another. I couldn't just sit here and wait. I needed answers. And then, finally, Martha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. Martha still hadn't answered me. The paramedics were growing more concerned, and I had no idea what was going on. My thoughts were racing faster than I could process them. What was happening? What wasn't my mom telling me? The oxygen mask had done its job for the moment, but it didn't calm the rising dread inside of me. There was something I wasn't being told, and it was all I could think about. What had happened in the past? Why was my mom so afraid to let me get the help I needed? "Mom, please, tell me what's going on," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. She flinched, just slightly, before her eyes locked with mine. There was something raw in her gaze, something deep and painful that I had never seen before. Lily, you don't understand. I can't let them do this to you. Her voice was shaky now, and I could hear the crack of fear behind the words. The oxygen mask was still over my face, pumping steady air into my lungs, but every breath felt heavier than the last. I didn't want the mask to be my only lifeline. I needed her to tell me the truth. Greg, the fire captain, stepped in between us. His expression was stern, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He had seen this kind of tension before. He wasn't going to let my mom stand in the way of treatment anymore. He wasn't going to allow her to make decisions for me. Ma'am, you need to step aside, Greg said firmly, his voice filled with authority. My mom's eyes flicked to him, and for a brief moment I thought she might argue again, but then, just as quickly, she closed her eyes as if gathering the strength to speak. She didn't move. The room was thick with silence, and I could feel the weight of my mom's hesitation pressing down on me. I had never seen her so vulnerable, so unwilling to act. It felt like she was being torn in two, one part of her wanting to protect me, the other part scared of the truth. I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand why she wouldn't let them help me. But instead of answering, my mom stepped back slightly, as though conceding. But there was something else, something I hadn't noticed before. I hadn't seen it until now, but she was shaking. She was terrified. You need to tell me what happened, I insisted, my voice a little more demanding now. I was tired of waiting, tired of being kept in the dark. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, she looked at me fully. Her eyes were filled with something I had never seen before, fear and guilt. The walls she had built around herself for so long seemed to crumble in that moment. It's not what you think, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't trying to hurt you, I was just trying to protect you from something worse. Something, she hesitated, her eyes welling with emotion. Something from the past. There it was. She wasn't just afraid of hospitals or treatments, she was hiding something. Something that happened long ago. And whatever it was clear it was the reason she had acted the way she did. The reason she had tried to stop the paramedics. I looked at her, my heart pounding. What happened, Mom? I wasn't going to let her avoid it anymore. I needed to know. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to hide the truth. You almost died when you were younger, Lily. There was a reaction, a medical emergency. We didn't know what was happening and, her voice cracked, we almost lost you. The words hit me like a tidal wave. My heart skipped a beat. I had always known there had been something serious in my past, something medical, but I didn't know it had been that bad. What kind of reaction? What had happened? What do you mean? I whispered, the fear creeping into my voice. What kind of reaction? She looked at me, her face pained, but there was no going back now. When you were a baby, you had an allergic reaction to something we couldn't identify. Your throat started to close up, and we didn't have an epinephrine shot with us. We rushed you to the hospital, but, she faltered, as if the memory itself was too painful to relive, but you were seconds away from suffocating. You were too young to know it, but I wasn't. I was watching my baby die, and I couldn't do anything. I could hardly breathe. The truth hit me like a blow to the chest, and I could feel my heart race in my chest, almost like it was trying to escape. What was she saying? She was telling me something I had never known, something she had kept hidden for so long. The past wasn't just a distant memory. It had shaped every decision she made since. She had been trying to protect me from something she couldn't control, but in doing so, she had almost lost me again, and I almost lost my chance to live. My head was spinning. Everything I had known about my mom, everything I thought I understood about her, was suddenly questioned. She wasn't just a protective mom. She was a mom haunted by the worst possible memory of all, the fear of losing her child. I took a deep breath, still trying to process it all. But Mom, that doesn't mean you can stop me from getting help now. I'm not a baby anymore. She shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. I couldn't let you go through that again, Lily. I couldn't. She trailed off, looking down at her hands. There was a long pause, and I could see the weight of her guilt crushing her. She wasn't just protecting me from physical danger. She was protecting herself from the possibility of reliving that nightmare. I don't know how to help you, Mom, I whispered. But I need you to trust me. I'm not that little girl anymore. I can handle it. The room was still, the tension hanging in the air. My mom nodded slowly, her eyes filled with tears. She finally stepped forward, and without another word, she gently touched my hand. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I was trying to protect you in the only way I knew how. But I couldn't help feeling the sting of betrayal. She had done what she thought was right, but in doing so, she had put me in a situation where I almost didn't make it. And I wasn't sure if I could forgive her for that, but for the first time I understood why she had acted the way she did. And in that moment, something shifted between us. The walls that had stood between us for years began to crumble. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken words. I could still feel the weight of everything that had just been revealed, but the oxygen flowing into my lungs gave me a moment of clarity. I stared at my mom, her face full of guilt and remorse, and I finally understood why she had acted the way she had. She wasn't just afraid for me, she was terrified of losing me again. As I let the oxygen mask slip off my face, I could feel my chest loosening, my heart slowing back to a regular beat. It wasn't just my body that needed time to recover, it was my mind too. My emotions had been running wild for hours, and now it was all starting to make sense. But the questions that had swirled in my head needed to be answered, and I wasn't ready to let this go until they were. "You almost lost me." The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an accusation. It was just an acknowledgement, the truth. My mom's shoulders sagged as if the weight of her secret had finally crushed her. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did, Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Apologies were complicated. We both knew that. Her protective instincts had come from a place of love, but I couldn't ignore the fact that her refusal to let the paramedics help me nearly cost me everything. I couldn't forgive her for that right away. "You should have trusted me," I said, the words sharp even though they stung me too. "I'm not a child anymore, I can handle it." She looked at me, her eyes wet with tears. She didn't answer, but I could see the raw pain in her face. She was battling with herself, her guilt, and her overwhelming fear, and that battle had been playing out in her mind for years, ever since that day when I was younger, the day that nearly killed me. But even with that, I wasn't sure how we could move forward. How could we go back to a normal relationship after everything that had happened? For a long moment, we just sat there, the quiet filling the space between us. The weight of everything was suffocating, but at the same time, it felt like a fragile breakthrough. We weren't shouting at each other anymore. We weren't arguing. It was something else entirely. I was scared. I was scared that the connection between us was forever broken. But for the first time in a long time, I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the cracks in her armor. She wasn't the same mom I had grown up with, the one who controlled every aspect of my life. No, she was a mother who had just realized she couldn't control everything anymore. It was tiny, but it was there. She didn't have to hide from me anymore. She didn't have to pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. And in that small moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had the power to make her believe it was okay for her to be honest with me. "I've been holding on to this fear for so long," she finally admitted, her voice cracking. "I thought I could protect you from everything, but I don't know how to let go." Letting go, that's what she was struggling with, and that's what I had to do too. I realized then that all these years I had been so angry at her for not letting me live my life, but the truth was I had never allowed her to let go of the past. I had always clung to the idea that she was supposed to be perfect, unflappable, always in control, but I had forgotten that she was human. She was vulnerable too. Maybe we both needed to let go. The next few days were strange. The silence between my mom and me wasn't tense anymore, but it was heavy with the weight of our conversation. It felt like we were both wading through an unfamiliar terrain, trying to find our footing again. The truth came with consequences. We couldn't just pretend that things hadn't happened the way they had. There were emotional scars that needed to be addressed, and neither of us was prepared to just move on. Martha started therapy soon after. She had been carrying the weight of that memory for so long, afraid of losing me again, that she didn't know how to move forward. She had to learn to let go of that fear, to trust that I could handle things, that I could take care of myself. And maybe for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to shield me from everything. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't helpless. As for me, I wasn't sure if I had fully forgiven her yet, but I did understand. I understood the love that had driven her actions, the pain she had been carrying for so long, and maybe that was enough. Final resolution moment. Weeks later, I sat with my mom in the kitchen, sipping coffee like we used to. The air wasn't filled with tension anymore. It was quiet, but peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to protect myself from her. I glanced over at her. "I'm glad you're going to therapy," I said, my voice quiet but sincere. "I think it's helping." She looked at me, the smallest smile curving her lips. It's helping me let go. And I realized then she wasn't the only one who had to let go. I was learning too, learning how to trust her again, how to trust myself. The healing wasn't going to be immediate. It wasn't going to be perfect, but we were taking steps together. Thank you, she said softly, for being patient with me, for helping me see that I wasn't the only one scared. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like we were walking side by side. And in that moment, I knew that things had changed, maybe not perfectly, but they had changed. We were beginning to trust each other again. And that was enough. The weeks following that day in the hospital were filled with a quiet kind of tension. It wasn't the kind of tension where we were constantly at each other's throats. No, it was something deeper. Something unspoken, yet loud enough to fill the space between my mom and me whenever we were together. But it was different now. It wasn't the type of silence that came from distance, it was the kind of silence that comes from uncertainty. For the first time, I saw my mom Martha as someone who wasn't always in control. She had always been so strong, so composed, that I had never seen her as vulnerable before. But now, I saw the cracks in her armor. She was trying to figure out how to fix things. And so was I. The first few therapy sessions weren't easy. We both sat there in that sterile office, facing someone who was supposed to help us navigate the mess of emotions that had built up between us. Dr. Stevens, a kind but no-nonsense therapist, had seen families like ours before. She was good at reading people, and I could see that she was trying to get us to open up, to talk about things we had never said aloud. Martha, Lily, can you both tell me what you think the biggest issue is right now? Dr. Stevens asked one afternoon, her pen poised over her notepad. There was an uncomfortable pause. My mom shifted in her chair, and I could feel the familiar walls going up around her. She wasn't used to talking about her emotions, especially not with a stranger. I think Lily doesn't trust me anymore, she said, her voice tight. And maybe she's right not to. The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know how to respond at first. There was so much anger in me still, so much hurt from that day in the hospital when she refused to let them help me. But her words made me pause. Maybe I didn't trust her the way I used to, but did she trust me? I looked at Dr. Stevens, then at my mom, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself feel the full weight of my own emotions. It's not just that, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It's that she tried to protect me from something that almost killed me. She wouldn't let me make my own decisions, and it felt like she didn't believe I could handle it. Mom's eyes softened, and I could see the flicker of guilt crossing her face. I never meant for you to feel that way, she whispered, more to herself than to me. I was so scared. I didn't want to lose you again. But I'm not a baby anymore, I said, the frustration slipping into my voice. I need you to trust me. I can make my own choices. I'm not the little girl I was when you lost control. There was a heavy silence after that. We had both said things that needed to be said, but the air was still thick with unprocessed emotions. Trust was fragile. It was something that could be broken in an instant and take years to rebuild, and we both knew it. The days after that session were difficult. There were moments of awkward silence between us at home. I could see my mom trying, but her guilt was still heavy on her shoulders, and it weighed on me too. It wasn't that we weren't trying to communicate, it was that we didn't know how. But over time, the therapy sessions started to help. It wasn't a quick fix. There were still days when I'd feel the old tension creeping back, especially when we didn't talk about what happened. But every so often, my mom would try to reach out. She would make me breakfast in the mornings, just like she used to, even if I didn't ask. Little things like that, things I didn't expect, reminded me that she was trying to show me that she cared. One morning, after another therapy session, I came home to find a note on the kitchen counter. It was from my mom, written in her neat handwriting. I'm proud of you, Lily. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I love you. Always have, always will. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I could see that she was starting to trust me again, and that meant everything. One evening, a few weeks after the hospital incident, we were sitting on the couch together, watching an old movie we had seen countless times. The comfort of the familiar seemed to bring something out in both of us. I could feel the change in the air this time. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. And in that moment, I knew that things were starting to heal. You know, my mom began quietly, her eyes still fixed on the TV, but her voice heavy with emotion. I didn't know how to let go. You were everything to me, and I couldn't stand the thought of losing you again. I turned to her, surprised by the rawness of her words. For the first time, she was letting down the walls she had built around herself. I know, Mom, I said softly, my own heart aching for her. I know, and I get it now. I really do. She turned her head to look at me, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I'm sorry for not trusting you, Lily. I've spent so long trying to protect you that I forgot to let you grow. I'm trying to do better. I didn't know what to say at first, but then I reached out and took her hand. I'm trying too, I whispered. I'm trying to trust you again. In that moment, I realized that healing wasn't about going back to what it used to be. It wasn't about pretending that everything had been perfect. It was about moving forward, together, in a new way. It was about learning to trust again, one small step at a time. The weeks that followed felt different. I could feel the distance closing between us, but it was slow. Healing wasn't linear, and there were days when I still felt angry and hurt. But there were more days when I felt that quiet understanding between us, the kind of understanding that comes only after real, raw honesty. We still had a long way to go, but the difference now was that we were both committed to the process. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that was enough. We celebrated small victories, like making dinner together or watching old movies without the heavy burden of unspoken words between us. And though it wasn't a quick or easy fix, I began to realize that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward together. And so, with each passing day, we built a new version of ourselves, a mother and daughter who had faced the worst of their fears and were learning, slowly but surely, to trust again. It had been a couple of months since that fateful day in the hospital. The words we had shared, the painful but necessary truths we had laid bare, were still with me. But so was something else, a sense of possibility. For the first time, I felt like the gap between my mom and me wasn't an insurmountable chasm. We were both learning how to walk beside each other again, but it wasn't just about moving forward. We were creating new paths, new understanding, and I knew that would take time. Mom had started to open up more. She'd spent years keeping her feelings locked inside, trying to carry the burden of my safety all by herself. Now, with therapy and her own emotional breakthroughs, she was beginning to share the things she'd kept hidden, the fears that had driven her every action, and the struggles that had been simmering beneath her protective exterior. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, she casually mentioned something that caught me off guard. You know, I used to think if I just kept you safe, if I never let you face any risk, then I could control everything. I could keep you from feeling pain. But I was wrong, wasn't I? She didn't look at me as she said it. She focused on chopping vegetables, but her voice trembled slightly. I paused for a moment, letting the words settle. They weren't just casual words. She wasn't just talking about me. She was acknowledging that she had spent years trying to control things for the wrong reasons. Yeah, you were, I replied softly. But I get it now. I don't want you to protect me from everything. I want you to trust me enough to let me make my own decisions. We can't go through life avoiding everything that scares us. Mom's hand stopped mid-chop, and she finally looked up at me. There was a softness in her eyes, something akin to both relief and sadness. I'm learning, Lily, she said quietly. I'm trying. I smiled, a genuine, small smile. I know, and I'm trying too. We weren't perfect, we weren't fixed, but we were learning. Slowly, piece by piece. The process of healing wasn't just about my mom, though. It was about me, too. After everything had happened, the terror in the hospital, the emotional roller coaster of trying to understand my mom's behavior, I realized that I had to deal with my own emotions. I had to forgive her. But I also had to forgive myself. I had spent so much time being angry at her for what she had done, for trying to control my life. But as I let the weight of everything sink in, I started to see that I wasn't angry at her alone. I was angry at myself too, for not speaking up sooner, for not trusting myself enough to make my own choices, for letting my fear and frustration build up without confronting it. I started writing in my journal more frequently. I found it helped me process everything I was feeling. One evening, after another difficult therapy session, I wrote, I'm learning to let go of the anger, but it's hard. I still feel it inside, and I'm not sure how to move past it. I want to trust Mom again, but I don't know how to start. I'm scared I'll let her down. I'm scared of her letting me down again. As I wrote those words, I realized just how much I had been holding on to. I had never learned to express my feelings fully, and it had kept me from growing. The next time I saw my mom, I handed her the journal entry without saying a word. At first, she just looked at it, confused, but then she read it silently, her face softening with every word. When she finished, she met my gaze and said, I didn't know you felt that way, but I understand, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I didn't know how to respond at first, but I realized in that moment that forgiving her didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant understanding it. I could see the effort she was making, the genuine regret in her eyes. It was enough. Our family dinners started to feel more comfortable, though there were still moments where silence lingered, but it wasn't suffocating silence anymore. It was just the kind of silence you share when you've said the things that needed to be said, when you're finally comfortable enough to just be with each other. One Saturday, we went on a hike together, something we used to do when I was younger. My mom, despite her hesitation to venture far beyond her comfort zone, agreed to come. We walked together, just the two of us, with no distractions, no phone calls, no hospital visits, no therapy sessions, just the two of us on a winding trail, letting the fresh air fill our lungs. "This feels nice," I said, breathing in the cool mountain air. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was a moment of peace. "Yeah, it does," she agreed, smiling softly. "We need more of this." "Yeah, we do," I said, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. As we reached the top of the trail and looked out over the valley below, I felt something shift. For the first time, I felt like my mom wasn't just a caretaker. She was a person, too. A person who had her own fears, her own struggles. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and so was I. It wasn't about going back to the way things were, it was about creating something new, together. And maybe that was enough. A few months after our hike, we decided to start a new tradition. A weekly family night where we would cook together, watch a movie, and just spend time with each other. There were no expectations, no need to have everything be perfect. It was just a chance to be together without the weight of the past hanging over us. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes old habits crept back in, like when my mom insisted on making sure everything was done perfectly, or when I snapped at her for controlling things too much. But we were getting better at noticing those moments and calling them out together. In time, our family night became something we looked forward to. It wasn't about the food or the movie. It was about the connection, about learning to rebuild the trust we had lost and realizing that, despite everything, we were still family. And that was enough. It had been several months since we started rebuilding what had been broken between my mom and me. And though we'd come a long way, I knew we were still on a journey. It wasn't always easy, and it certainly wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like we had everything figured out, and then there were days when old patterns would resurface, when my mom would slip into her overprotective ways, or when I would retreat, hiding behind anger instead of confronting it head on. But something was different now. We were both trying. We had learned how to communicate in ways we hadn't before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in the mess of it all, that felt like a victory. One afternoon, we were sitting on the porch drinking tea together as we watched the sunset. We weren't talking about anything deep, it was just a moment of quiet companionship. But it felt significant, like a moment in time where we weren't caught up in the past, but were simply enjoying being in each other's company. Mom broke the silence first, her voice soft. "You know, I didn't expect it to be this hard. I thought if I just kept you safe, if I never let anything bad happen to you, then I could fix everything. But it didn't work, did it?" I turned to look at her. Her eyes weren't focused on me. They were looking out at the horizon, lost in thought. But I could hear the regret in her voice, the weight of all the years spent trying to control things that she couldn't control. "No, it didn't," I said gently. "But I think we're learning now. That's what matters." She nodded, but there was still that faint sadness in her eyes, the kind of sadness that came from realizing that things couldn't just go back to the way they were. We both had to move forward. Despite our progress, there were still times when I could see my mom's old instincts kicking in. One day, I went out with friends for the first time in months, something that felt small but important to me. I'd been hesitant to do it before, unsure of how my mom would react. But on that day, I felt different. I felt like I was ready to start living again, without always worrying about what she'd think or how she'd react. When I told her, she hesitated, looking at me with concern in her eyes. "Lily, are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "What if something happens?" It wasn't the first time she'd asked me that, and part of me wanted to snap at her. Part of me wanted to say, "You can't protect me from everything," but I stopped myself. I knew she wasn't coming from a place of control anymore. She was coming from a place of love. "I'll be fine, Mom," I said, trying to reassure her, even though I could feel the weight of her worry hanging between us. "I need to start trusting myself again, and I need you to trust me too." She looked at me for a long moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, she exhaled softly and nodded. "Okay, just be careful, and if you need me, I'm here." I could see the struggle in her face. She was letting go, but it wasn't easy. And as I walked out the door to meet my friends, I felt something shift inside me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where I took control of my life again, where I took ownership of my choices. And even though it felt scary, I realized it was exactly what I needed. To finally stand on my own without feeling like I was constantly being held back. But it wasn't just about me, it was about us. My mom was learning too, learning to trust me, learning to give me the space to grow, and that meant everything. Healing, however, isn't a smooth path. Just when things seemed to be going well, a setback hit. A few weeks after my night out with friends, I had a health scare. A minor incident, really, but enough to send my mom into a spiral of worry. She'd always been like this, quick to assume the worst, but this time, I felt like she was more than just concerned. She was scared. She hadn't let me out of her sight all day. I wasn't feeling well, but it wasn't anything that required immediate attention. A slight headache, dizziness, nothing that a little rest couldn't fix. But when she rushed into my room, her face pale and her hands trembling, I knew it wasn't just about me being sick. "You need to go to the hospital right now," she said, her voice tight. "I'm calling 911. I stopped her before she could grab the phone. "Mom, no, I'm fine," I said, sitting up and grabbing her arm gently. "It's just a headache. You don't have to freak out." But she pulled away, her face flushed with panic. "I can't just let you go through something like this alone. What if it's like before? What if I lose you?" That old fear was there again, thick in her voice, and it hit me like a punch to the stomach. I hadn't realized just how much of her fear I was still carrying, how much I had allowed her to control my life out of that fear. We hadn't completely healed yet. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I know it's scary, but we've talked about this. I need to handle this on my own. I need you to trust me." Her hands shook as she stood there, her eyes wide with worry, but I could see it the moment she realized she couldn't keep holding me back anymore. Slowly, she nodded, and I could see the struggle in her eyes. She was letting go again. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, but if you need me, I'll be right here. A better tomorrow." That night, after the headache had passed, my mom and I sat on the porch again, this time without the heavy air of unspoken words between us. The old patterns hadn't disappeared completely, but we were learning to navigate them. "You were right," she said, looking out at the sky, the first stars beginning to appear. "I need to stop letting my fear control us. I can't keep you in a bubble forever." I smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "I don't want you to. I want you to trust me, Mom, and I need to trust myself too." We sat in silence for a while, just letting the cool breeze wash over us. No words needed. We were still figuring it all out, still learning how to trust, how to let go, but we were doing it together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving forward. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but together. And that was enough. This deeper exploration focuses on the gradual, imperfect journey of healing for both Lily and her mom. They faced setbacks, but through it all, they continue to grow and learn how to trust each other again. The expansion shows that even after significant progress, healing is a long road, one with challenges, but also with moments of real connection and understanding. A sense of independence. As time passed, the healing process between me and my mom became less about monumental breakthroughs and more about the small moments that revealed the growth we had undergone. We were building a new kind of relationship, one where we could stand on our own and still lean on each other when it was necessary. And while the road wasn't always smooth, there was one thing I'd learned: trust doesn't mean perfection. I was still learning how to stand on my own. After the hospital incident, I had decided to take more control over my health, making sure I took better care of myself and didn't let fear dictate my choices. I knew that fear was a powerful thing, and I didn't want to live my life constantly afraid of what could go wrong. I had to take risks. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was doing it alone. One afternoon, I came home from work, tired but proud of myself for taking the initiative. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine. She glanced up when I walked in, her face lighting up with a smile that still felt like a bit of a relief after all we had been through. "How was work?" she asked, her tone light, almost casual. It was a stark contrast to how she used to hover over me. There was no anxiety, no concern about my safety. She was beginning to trust me in a way that felt different from before. "It was good. Actually, I'm planning on meeting some friends this weekend." The words slipped out naturally, and as soon as they did, I realized how far I had come. A few months ago, I would have expected my mom to go into full-on panic mode at the thought of me going out with friends, but instead, she just raised her eyebrows and nodded. "That sounds nice," she said, smiling. "Be careful, but I'm proud of you." I stood in the doorway for a second, surprised by the simplicity of the moment. My mom had learned to let go of her constant worry, and I had learned to stand tall on my own. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The trust between us had shifted from one of dependence to one of mutual respect, and that felt like a new beginning. The quiet strength of vulnerability. But just as things seemed to smooth out, another challenge arose. I wasn't prepared for how much work this healing process would require, not just from my mom, but from me as well. A few weeks after our small victory with my independence, I faced a personal setback. I had been feeling unwell for a few days, but I brushed it off as stress or exhaustion. After all, I had been balancing work, my personal life, and trying to rebuild the relationship with my mom. I figured it was just the toll of juggling everything. But when the dizziness wouldn't go away and I felt like I was on the verge of fainting one night, I realized something was wrong. I ended up going to the doctor and got the news that I had been avoiding a health condition I had long been ignoring. The news hit me hard. I didn't want to face it, didn't want to admit that I had let my health slide under the radar, but it was real, and it was something I had to confront. And the thought of telling my mom filled me with dread. The old reflex kicked in, the fear of worrying her, the fear of disappointing her. But then, I thought about how much we had both changed. I thought about the trust we had built. I knew I couldn't hide this from her. The conversation was tough. I found her in the kitchen that evening and the weight in my chest felt like it might suffocate me. "Mom," I said quietly, drawing her attention, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked up at me, her smile fading as she saw the seriousness in my eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice already filled with concern. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking slightly. "I went to the doctor today. They found something wrong with me. I have a condition. It's not life-threatening, but I need to manage it, and it's going to take some time." Her face fell, her eyes instantly filling with worry. I could see the old reflex, the instinct to protect me, to take control of the situation, but this time, I didn't let her. "I'm going to be okay, Mom," I reassured her, my voice firm. "But I need you to trust me again. I can handle this. I don't want you to take over." Her lips parted, and I could see her struggle between her need to protect and her understanding that I wasn't the same person I was before. For the first time, she didn't rush in to fix everything. Instead, she stepped back and took a deep breath. "I'm scared, Lily," she said, her voice raw. "I can't help it. I'm scared of losing you again." I moved toward her, gently taking her hands in mine. "I know, Mom. I know. But I need you to trust me. I'm going to be okay. I need to do this on my own, just like I need you to let me. We've come so far." There was a long silence, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. My mom looked at me, her eyes filled with both fear and love, and slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice full of vulnerability. "Okay." In that moment, I realized how far we had come. We were no longer trapped in the cycle of fear and control. We had built something new, a foundation of trust and vulnerability. It wasn't just about independence. It was about knowing that we could rely on each other, not by controlling each other, but by being there for each other when it mattered most. Moving forward, together. The weeks that followed were tough. I had to adjust to managing my condition, but I also had to manage the delicate balance of continuing my journey toward independence without alienating my mom. There were setbacks, but there were also triumphs. I could feel myself becoming more grounded, more capable of handling what came my way, and I could see that my mom was learning to let go a little more with each passing day. We continued our weekly family nights, our small moments of shared joy and connection, where we didn't talk about the past or the future. We just were together, and that was enough. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my mom turned to me with a smile that seemed more genuine than it had been in years. "I'm proud of you, Lily," she said softly. "You're becoming the person I always knew you could be." I looked at her, a smile tugging at my lips. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. We've both come a long way." And in that moment, I realized something else. Healing wasn't just about moving on from the past, it was about embracing the future with the people we love. It was about learning to trust, not perfectly, but steadily, and knowing that even in our flaws, we could build something stronger than before. We weren't finished yet, but we were heading in the right direction. As I sat there with my mom, watching the familiar sunset together, I felt something deep inside me, a quiet peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from everything being perfect. It was the kind that came from knowing that, despite everything we had been through, we had found a way to move forward. We were rebuilding, slowly but surely. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that everything was going to be okay.
Do you think she was protecting Or is there something darker at play here?